pull up my notes and get Steve on the screen here. Really looking forward to the conversation. I'm going to apologize to Steve in advance, as I apologized to Steve earlier in the morning. We are not as coherent as we once were, having been on the air now for all these hours. So, Steve,
Yeah,
good
you
morning.
told me that would happen. Yeah, you told me
Yes.
that would happen.
I did warn
Okay.
you. I did warn you. Good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
And if you would, just kind of introduce yourself and
Sure. Sure. I'm Steve Morse. I live in Oakland, California, where I'm at right now. I'm been a union member my whole adult life, retired member of Sheet Metal Workers, Local 104. Now it's called SMART, Sheet Metal Air Rail Transport. I'm a veteran. I was in the Army from 69 to 71. I was in Vietnam. I've been in anti-war. I'm going to say more about that, my experience in the Army in a minute. But I've been in the anti-war veterans movement for a long time, particularly right after I got out in Vietnam Veterans Against the War. And then starting in 85, we formed a new group, Veteran Speakers Alliance, in the San Francisco Bay Area, and that became part of Veterans for Peace. So I've been active with that for since then. And I co-started the Climate Crisis and Militarism Project within Veterans for Peace in 2020. And that we had Zoom, like I'm zooming in from California. So we've been able to meet, pull together a national group from various places. And more recently, I've started within Veterans for Peace and kind of within the Climate Crisis and Militarism Project, campaign called Veterans and Labor for Sensible Priorities. And this is, and I'll say more about that. This is, we're trying to get unions to endorse a $100 billion cut in the Pentagon budget. So this is in conjunction with a campaign called People Over Pentagon, which is, and it's in conjunction with Barbara Lee. Barbara Lee is my representative actually here in Oakland. And
congratulations.
Mark Pocan from Wisconsin. Yeah, from Wisconsin. It's HR 1134, and it's not going to pass in this, but they're looking at it in the long range, as we are. So those projects I'm involved in. It is what's referred to as Veterans Day today, and I want to reference that some. In Veterans for Peace, we have a campaign to rename it Armistice Day. It was Armistice Day from 1918 through 1954, and the change to Veterans Day was really not supporting veterans in a real sense, but it was not talking about peace, armistice, because they were in the middle of they were promoting war in the Cold War in the mid-50s, as they have been ever since. And so we don't have that. Other countries, there are countries that still celebrate Armistice Day as Armistice Day. But there's a lot of things that they don't pay attention to about veterans on this day. And one is that veterans don't necessarily go along with the program. So I was part of a resistance movement when I was in the Army from 69 to 71, GI resistance. And I was jailed for almost 6 months for passing out leaflets twice. They're pretty similar cases, once near the beginning of my time, once near the end, once at the end. And in both cases, I highlighted GI revolts that were taking place in different ways, and also the situation of the war and imperialism. So I got busted for that. But there was it really helped stop the war. This is so little known now that the GIs, particularly Army and then later the Navy, were in revolt. We were in revolt, and they couldn't, they couldn't function the way, and that really helped end the war. And Vietnam War movement, of course, was very big, but it's not talked about too much now. Even the civilian movement, but the soldiers movement, much less even. So one thing they don't talk about today is moral injury and suicides. I want to get heavy here for a minute. I'm going to read a quote from Matt Ho, who's a Veterans for Peace member and a commentator. He says, the father of a soldier tells me that his son's brigade had 11 combat deaths in their year in Afghanistan, but over 100 suicides in the ensuing 10 years after coming home. A New York Times story from 2015, tracking a Marine Corps infantry battalion returned home from combat in Afghanistan, found that those young men had a suicide rate 14 times their civilian peers. So this is not talked about. There's like, thank you for your service and stuff like that. But if we're really willing to listen to veterans without judgment and open to what they talk about, then that's a better chance. That's a better chance of not having this pretense. Because what happens in this Veterans Day business is that people, the powers that be definitely, but people in general also are not really dealing with what the soldiers experience and why they have this moral injury and why they commit suicide. So it also doesn't deal with the effects of war on militarism within the U.S. in general, or outside the U.S. where we've made war, or veterans in other countries. That's just completely off the table. So Anyway, that's something about Veterans Day. I want to talk about labor, and particularly in relation to militarism, but also in relation to climate crisis and racism. Organized workers have the power to stop what's going on in the world. We have the power to stop fossil fuel hegemony.
Right.
Which is going to kill. It's going to destroy us. Because their pursuit of profit is not going to stop, no matter what, no matter how many species are killed, or no matter how many people's lives are made miserable and uprooted and everything like that. So who can stop them? Well, really, organized workers can stop them, but organized workers need to have allies. And there needs to be alliance. So I want to talk about intersectionality. And there's there's at least a couple of things about it. One is with intersectionality, where you thinking of different issues, you have a bigger vision. You have a bigger vision. And a labor-led intersectionality is a big step forward for labor, because for one, not only the bigger vision, but also you can build coalitions that can win. So talk a little about intersectionality in the UAW strike, recent UAW strike. Of course, this has been a very inspiring thing. And, we've heard the term working class being used outside of a Bernie rally for the first time with Sean Fain, when we, heard his talks. And one thing, in my building trades union, I saw the Sierra Club demonized and this split between environmentalists and labor. And it was like crazy. It was driving me nuts. And so in the UAW strike, the UAW never opposed moving to electric vehicles.
Right.
But they want just transition. They didn't want to race to the bottom. So they won stuff on the batteries, the battery factories and the electric cars. And that was big, but 120 environmental organizations supported the UAW in the strike. And that's big, and that's intersectional, and that's new. That hadn't happened. Now, on September 16th, I read an article where they were trying to, I think maybe it was in Forbes, couldn't find it, but again, I was looking for it, but they were trying to pit the workers against environmentalists. But I never saw any more about that because of all these, because of this unity.
It didn't stick. It seemed like it didn't stick. I saw some of that they were trying to do too, and it seemed like it just never quite stuck.
Yeah. Because then it might have gotten publicized, really in the mainstream, what all these, the environmental, supporting workers, supporting, good jobs, and transition to a green economy. I mean, so this is the way to go. Now, speaking about racism too, anti-racism, I mean, all the clips I saw, you saw Black workers, white workers, women, men, different people of different ethnicities, and they're all working together, right? They all know that they need unity to win, and they had the unity and they won. It doesn't mean there's no racism among any of the workers. It doesn't mean that, but it means that this is the way, this is actually the biggest way in the whole society that racial unity can be effective, can work in union struggles and strikes.
Right, absolutely. And there's, we even have research to back that up, that union membership can decrease racial resentment, right? And really make a tangible difference on people's racism.
Right. Now, I want to talk a little about militarism, because militarism did not come up in that. And that's kind of okay. I mean, they did what they needed to do, and it's a big move forward for workers and for the country. The winning of the UAW strike and the winning of the UPS strike and the change in leadership among the Teamsters and among the UAW is really, really dramatic and significant. But can we extend, why should workers oppose militarism? Well, those suicide I talked about and the moral injury is basically working class men and women who have been sent to war, sometimes repeatedly, in these Iraq, Afghanistan wars. But if we just militarism, we've got a new figure of $1.5 trillion, and that's not just the Pentagon budget, but that includes about $400 million in interest payments because they ran these wars on a credit card. There's always enough money for war, right? There's never enough money for education and healthcare, but always enough for war. But they're putting it on the credit card, so we're paying interest, and then veterans' expenses. Well, we want to have a good VA. We want veterans taken care of, but we also have to realize that it's a result of militarism that the need is there. So those things get counted, and that's not part of the discretionary budget, the interest in the veterans. The Pentagon is part of the discretionary budget, which is, militarism is well more than half of the discretionary budget of the U.S. But, the military is the U.S. military is the biggest emitter of global heating gases, greenhouse gases, and as their political role, they protect corporate plundering around the world. So they protect oil companies, wars for oil, right?
Right.
And just all this resources that they're using money and material. So we're trying to get 100 billion. We're talking about $100 billion back, and that's not enough. But what we want to do with this proposal is put kind of militarism on the table in unions, so that gets engaged. And I'll go into a little of the history of that. And then, all this money, they're not just neutral about things. these war industries depend on war. Their stock goes up with this uh, Israeli attack on Gaza, Ukraine, their stock goes up. Um, and then racism. I don't know. People don't always think of racism in relation to the military, but look, I was in Vietnam. I saw how racist slurs were used constantly, and that wasn't just accidental. That wasn't just coming from the rank and file. That was policy. And the same thing happened in the Iraq and Afghanistan war, racial slurs. And of course, within the society, you had this anti-Muslim thing that happened after 9/11. But right. It's more intense within the military, because if you're going to get people to go halfway around the world and kill other people and be willing to be killed and wounded and damaged, then you got to get them to hate. And so these are people they would otherwise have nothing against. And so they promote war, and then war creates environmental disaster as well as human disaster. And then if you think of like what the carbon effect, if a war ends, then you've got rebuilding. Well, there's a lot of, the concrete and all the building materials and all that stuff. That's a whole carbon impact in itself. Right. So workers, we need to get the money back. We need to not have our young people subjected to being killed, wounded, and living and with moral injury and often committing suicide. So those are among the things. So I'm going to talk about some of what happened with the AFL-CIO and U.S. Labor Against the War. So I'm kind of heading this thing up in Veterans for Peace, this initiative, Veterans and Labor for Sensible Priorities. And the two people I'm working with closely were former leaders of U.S. Labor Against the War, which started in 2003. And quickly, there was a lot of protests against the Iraq War. And quickly, they got 200 labor groups as members. So they had, some of them were unions, some of them were labor councils. And by 2005, they got a resolution at the AFL-CIO convention against the Iraq War. Now that was a big shift, because right. Prior to that, AFL-CIO had backed the Cold War under George Meany and Lane Kirkland. They were, not necessarily the labor councils. Where I live, I'm in Alameda County, Oakland. They took a position against the Vietnam War in '69, San Francisco in 1970. This wasn't the common, though, throughout the country. So anyway, it's a shift. AFL-CIO in 2011 and 2017 made statements like what we're talking about, shifting money from the military to human needs, healthcare, education, dealing with poverty and stuff like that. So I don't know. They haven't really, the National AFL just chastised the Seattle Labor Council for going too far and calling for a ceasefire. Well, that's not really. That's just what's needed. So that wasn't a good thing.
Yeah.
So anyway,
it's not been shocking, but it's been still unfortunate to see, like the same old from AFL-CIO leadership. And that seems to be more of the same. So not shocked by it, but still not good.
Disappointed. Yeah. I mean, some labor, I'm going to put stuff in the chat here. I've got 8 links, and maybe I'll get to explain them. The first 2 are first two are for our veterans and labor for accessible priorities links, and then next one is the climate crisis and militarism project link. Then there's a labor letter that a number of unions and about 1,500 individuals have signed, which I think is which I think is well written. And
Oh, excellent.
I'm going to get to the rest. I'm going to get to the rest of those in a minute and in a while. But I do want to say there has been some work. There has been some opposition among labor to militarism, and a big area is among port workers. Now, ILWU, International Longshore and Warehouse Union, which is a West Coast union. It's not the Gulf or the East Coast, but it's an anti-racist left-wing union. It's really, in the 30s with the San Francisco General Strike, it really made San Francisco Union Town, and they've done a number of shutdowns around, like South Africa apartheid, police violence. But in 2008, they shut down all 29 West Coast ports around the Iraq War, May Day. So that's probably the biggest thing that labor in the U.S. has done. Port workers are currently involved in Genoa. There's a autonomous collective of port workers, and every year from 2019 till the present, they've taken an action refusing to load arms. Sometimes for the war in Yemen, Ukraine. Yesterday they had an action in Genoa, stopping. Barcelona is on November 7th.
Oh yeah,
pledged no materials to Israel or Ukraine, any war zone. So this is happening. I want to mention something about Lucas Industries, which was in the UK, Britain, and I'm going to read the thing from that. In 1976, the militant workforce within Lucas Aerospace were facing significant layoffs, and they had about half military contracts and half others. And there was some cutback, after the Vietnam War on military spending. So then it says, under the leadership of Mike Cooley, they developed a Lucas plan to convert the company from arms to the manufacture of socially useful products and save jobs. The plan was described by Tony Benn, who's a left-wing politician, as one of the most remarkable exercises that have ever occurred in British industrial history. The plan took a year to put together, consisted of 6 volumes of around 200 pages each, and included designs for 150 proposed items for manufacture, market analysis, and proposals for employee training and restructuring the firm's work organization. Well, that inspired a lot of people on the grassroots level. It didn't fly, though, because of opposition from the company, the government, and the official union leaders. So, but that's inspirational. It can be done.
Right.
And
hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
Yeah, well, and that's... Steve, I'm wondering if this is all really, really, really important stuff, and we're looking forward to hearing more. I think that there are cracks in the dam with respect to labor's position on Israel-Palestine, and we're seeing more and more people come out. So. I think Dimenstein at the Postal Workers is really leading the charge at the national level. But right. And if it's not too personal or if it's not something that you would prefer not to talk about, I'd be interested in your experience as somebody who was a GI organizing against the war, because I'm kind of assuming that your experience in Vietnam was something that was really formative for you as you were coming into your politics, and really seems to have set your life on a trajectory that you are still going down, today. And so I'm always interested in, what made people the people that they are today. And so would you care to talk to us about that experience and why it was formative for you?
Well, yeah, it was in a way, but my experience is a little unusual. I mean, I grew up as a Quaker in Pennsylvania, and so
wow,
that wasn't all wonderful, but there was an opposition to the Cold War in the 50s when I was born in 46, and so I got a different perspective from that. Now, my father's family, I didn't even know this till later in adulthood, but his mother and father were promoters of World War I. So he was from New England, and he has a complicated history around that. He worked for peace, but he was actually he was in military intelligence in Hawaii, World War II, monitoring Japanese Hawaiians and subversives within the army.
right.
And I became one. And he thought it was kind of ironic. I really didn't I didn't really pin him down on enough stuff before he before he died and stuff.
Right.
But anyway, I was in the anti-war movement from kind of early on when Vietnam started. I was in college for 2 years, and I left and came out to California and was doing some anti-war things. Like I got involved with a paper. I think it was maybe the first paper. It was put out by civilians. Later, there were like 300 GI underground papers. Few people know this, but anyway, at that time, 1967, I got involved in trying to pass it out to GIs, and I met a guy at the USO who was trying to organize, the older guys trying to organize within the Navy, and every time a new paper would come out every couple of weeks, I'd give him a stack of papers and he'd be passing them out. And I read about what was going on, the early opposition within the military, because that's what the paper was doing. I'd read it, of course. And so gradually I thought, well, I really wasn't facing going into the Army, but I decided to go to be part of that movement. But and then I just kind of threw myself in there. I didn't sign up. I signed up for 2 years. I didn't sign up for a school or anything. And then they gave me orders for infantry Vietnam. I get trained in infantry, and I thought, oh man, what the hell have I done? So anyway, I'm in a political group, and there are other people that've gone in the Army and everything. And we put out a leaflet. We go up to Seattle, or Fort Lewis up there by Seattle, where I had to report. This other guy with me, and they put him on security hold, but they didn't put me on. So it's like I had orders. So it's like I had all these leaflets about GI revolts in Vietnam and everything. We put together a pretty good thing. And I was like, I don't care if I go to the stockade. That's just, that's not going to bother me compared to going to Vietnam in infantry. So I got busted after a while. And the postal strike happened right then. So while I was there, this big national wildcat in 1970, unprecedented, they're not allowed to strike, right?
Right.
And so then they're using GIs as scabs. Well, the GIs weren't being too effective as scabs, which is part of the idea. They didn't really want to be too effective. Right. Army was kind of in revolt by then. And anyway, I got busted. So then I had a court martial, and it was a time of the Kent State killings and the Cambodian invasion. I mean, hell was breaking loose, and the 13,000 people stopped the freeway in Seattle around this stuff. And so some of them came to my court martial, and I would defend myself and try to put the Army on trial, right? So, so they gave me a 4-month sentence, but after 2 weeks, they shipped me out. They gave me orders for Vietnam. They didn't tell me. I mean, they just bam like that, and I had to think pretty quickly what I wanted to do. And,
yeah.
And I think they were setting me up to give me refuse and give me a 5-year sentence, because they had done that with some of the political resistors. And so I decided to go. And luckily, I was in a combat unit, but luckily there wasn't much combat. I was in the last 2 weeks of the Cambodian. Nixon had said they were going to be out of Cambodia by the end of June, and I got sent to the field June 15th. They were kind of on their way out. And I figured, well, this was an armored unit, and I figured they weren't going to take a chance of keeping a very visible armored unit in Cambodia beyond June 30th. So we did leave June 27th after 5 people were killed. 5 GIs were killed.
Well,
so I don't know. I think what happened is I sort of signed on for life when I made that decision to go in the Army. So in a way that's somewhat different from other veterans, there's some continuity between this anti-war veterans work. But I was moved back in the late 60s when I came to California, and before I was in the Army, by some of the early people who were resistors or veterans speaking out. Donald Duncan, some of the people speaking out against the war who'd been part of it and believed in it, maybe in many cases, but they were moving things. And I saw that, because it wasn't like World War II. It was like you were there a year and then you were out, unless you decided to extend. So there were people by 67 who had already been to Vietnam and were anti-war Vietnam veterans, and they were saying that on a placard in the march, and so it seemed the veterans' voice seemed important, So I did think if I survived, okay, I might use that voice. Even back then, I was thinking that, and so I'm trying to do that still.
Yeah, and I think that's really cool. Just that, you've been willing to share that, and also admire your dedication and your willingness to, pay consequences for your principles. And that's been a theme throughout our marathon over the last 28 hours, 27 hours, however long we've been on the air at this point now. But that keeps coming up, that, that we're often put in these positions, being people like we are, who do want to see positive change in the world, who want to see working people come together, who want to see peace, who want to see an end to war and militarism. As people like that, we often have to take, difficult positions, and we often face consequences and retaliation. And I think showing up for one another and showing solidarity is really, really important. And I think when folks face those consequences, we got to have their back. I think that's just something that's really important, and something that, I hope that you've been able to witness a lot of solidarity throughout your many years in the movement. I just have a lot of respect for all that you've done, and your willingness to, keep fighting and keep working towards, a better future free from war and militarism.
Yeah. Steve, is there anything else that you want to make sure that you leave us with before we let you go?
Well, I think this thing with Gaza and Israel is really significant, and we really have to, I hope labor more steps forward in terms of pushing a ceasefire. I think we have to recognize that in the U.S. there's a rise of anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim, racism. Both, they're both happening together, but we have to address both. I think Jews are going to get blamed a lot for what Israel is doing. And I think the actions of Jewish Voice for Peace, and if not now, in the Grand Central Station and the Rotunda in D.C. and Statue of Liberty are very important. It's very important that Jewish voice, and that people people understand what Jews have faced as well, and the Palestinian, but in the mainstream, the Palestinians are being ignored and being expendable, and that's horrible. Yeah. And so we have to look at the situation both of both groups, and I hope that'll happen. But I find it hard sometimes to see in the same article people talking about both of those things, and I think we
right.
Do that.
Exactly.
And I do put some more things in the chat.
Okay.
There's
do that
article I wrote for Labor Notes on the Australian green bans, which is very inspiring. What construction workers did fought for themselves very well, and also fought for the city. They're credited with saving Sydney, this beautiful city, from stupid demolition, and they went on strike many times to protest bad building. And Tony Matsoki, I got to think about Tony Matsoki. We don't have time to talk about him, but he was a great inspiration, strong labor leader, environmentalist, and he actually formed Labor for Peace, brought together union leaders in 1972. So he kind of did it all.
I did not know that about Mazaki.
The last thing, if you want to read about the breakdown. If you want to read about the breakdown of the U.S. Army, Colonel Robert Heinel, that's the last thing I've got written there. Check it out. So,
all right. Well,
thank you, guys.
Appreciate that, and for dropping that knowledge about Mazaki. I'm a Mazaki fan, but I did not know that he did that. I mostly know him for his work for a just transition and with the U.S. Labor Party. So appreciate that. I now have another.
Yeah. Well, he's credited with. Nixon credited him with being the main force for establishing OSHA, which.
That's right. That's right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks again, Steve, for coming on.
Okay.
I'll be in touch with you for sure, because I've learned a lot from you, and again, I appreciate your dedication to the movement and your willingness to come on and share a little bit of wisdom with us. So thanks again. Take care, Steve.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, Adam, Jacob, thank you.
Yes, sir. Appreciate you.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.